much, Elliot. Well, we can introduce other members of the team for those of you who haven't been tracking this climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking effort. That's what we're here to talk about today. My name is Kevin Young. I'm a senior urban planner with DLCD. I've been working mainly on the climate-friendly and equitable the climate-friendly area regulations. Evan, would you introduce yourself?
I saw you were on that meeting yesterday.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Evan Manville, climate mitigation planner here at DLCD, he, him pronouns. I've been the lead on parking reform and EV charging, electric vehicle charging.
Other at some point,
Cody?
Any other watch outs that you've seen that
yeah, Carl, looks like you're unmuted there.
comments yesterday on like,
I don't know if someone can, yeah, thanks. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Cody Meyer with DLCD. I'm a land use transportation planner. Matt.
Matt Kroll, also with Department of Land Conservation and Development, having fun with this rulemaking process as we're getting towards the end here. Not at the end, but getting close to. And I guess I should hand Bill. I dropped the ball there, didn't I?
Everyone, Bill Holmstrom, DLCD staff, along with Kevin, one of the co-managers of the project, but it takes a lot of people, as you can hear, to make this work. I know we have a couple other DLCD staff on the call here. I'll hand it over to MA.
Good morning. I'm MA Koteo Yakon, Land Use and Transportation Planner with DLCD. Ryan?
Hi, everyone. Ryan Markwart, and I'm also a land use and transportation planner with DLCD. And are there any other DLCD staff that we haven't sent it over to yet?
I see we have Nicole Mardell is here, one of our regional reps.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Nicole Mardell. I'm the regional representative for the Mid-Willamette Valley. Mostly just listening in to see what questions pop up today.
Also, Ethan Stuckmeyer is here.
Good morning, everyone. Ethan Stuckmeyer, Senior Housing Planner at DLCD. Kind of just listening in today.
And of course, this whole meeting wouldn't be happening if it weren't for Ingrid Caudell and Elliot and their assistance with this whole virtual meeting. So without further ado, why don't we just launch right into questions or comments. So if folks have questions or comments regarding the draft rules, just go ahead and raise your hand and we'll respond as we are able to. All right, I see a question from Alex.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to ask my question early because I'm driving and may lose cellular. So I was curious, these are opportunities and for DLCD staff to respond to questions. And the last meeting on Wednesday, there was a lot of questions and discussion of how the rule is going to be implemented. And I'm curious, is there any intention to take the information that's been discussed in these meetings and somehow figure out how the rule is going to need to be either changed or or how the interpretation of the rule is somehow solidified to match the responses that were given either today or last meeting, so that it's documented and will it be brought back to another similar meeting? So that's my question. I hope you heard me okay.
Yeah, we did. And I'm sorry, Alex. I meant to say if you could just introduce yourself at the beginning, that would be great. If you wouldn't mind. Sure. Alex Georgevich. I'm city engineer for the city of Medford. Thank you. Hey, Alex. Sorry, I didn't recognize your voice. So yes, the whole point of this is to inform the rulemaking, and staff are working on the next iteration of the rules. You know, I can't say that at this time that we're going to have another meeting to kind of go over those issues before we go into the public hearing process. Obviously, we're getting a lot of input from a lot of folks, and really that is the point at which kind of where we're moving to. And I think we need to be very clear. The rules are draft. They can be amended. They will be amended after we publish this version. After the Secretary of State's office publishes this version, which the tentative date is March 1st. But the rules can evolve from there, and the whole point of this exercise is to hear and make adjustments where we can to address things. I hope that answers your question, Alex.
Thank you. And just to follow up, I appreciate that you guys are going to use this to help influence it. I'm just wondering if there's going to be any follow-up with either the interested parties or RAC members up to any changes that are proposed as we progress through to the final hearing. So hopefully that helps clarify what I'm looking for. Not necessarily that there'll be a meeting, but there will be some acknowledgement of here's what we heard and here's how we're changing things or why we're changing things.
Okay. Yeah, and I think at this point we are planning to schedule a placeholder meeting for the rulemaking advisory committee members between the March hearing and the May hearing. For potentially for that purpose, it's not necessarily locked in stone at this time, but look for that invitation coming up in the next little while. Okay, let's go ahead and move to our next person, which is Alyssa.
Thank you, Kevin, and I'm glad to see you wearing a hoodie. Just felt like that kind of a day. Alyssa, City of Eugene's planning director, representing my I Love Eugene hoodie. I have some questions about the 30%. And I wanted to bring, Kevin, I emailed you this question, but I kind of would like to bring it up in the group because I feel like maybe we're not the only one in this circumstance. And that's in calculating that initial 30%. We take our existing, which here is about I'm going to round numbers, 78,000 homes existing. We look at our HNA to see what our 20-year need is, but we're actually 10 years into our HNA planning period. So we've actually, based on our growth monitoring program, we have determined that we've actually built half of our needs. So about 7,500 of those homes are actually existing. So it seems to be double counting if we take the 78,000 plus our need and then take 30% of that. It seems like we should be able to take those houses that have already been built off of our housing need because they're within the existing need. Does that make sense?
It does, as you have just said that, Alyssa. No, that is helpful. So essentially, let me try to restate what I think you just said, which is you have a number of 78,000 homes, which is basically your in rough numbers, your understanding of existing housing in Eugene. That is all the currently constructed housing in Eugene, more or less.
More or less.
And so part of that housing was built after the HNA was adopted and acknowledged, and that is addressing a part of that identified need over the planning period. And then so if you take that, that should be subtracted from the equation in terms of getting to your overall housing need. And I'm sorry, I was not understanding that issue, but that makes perfect sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah, because otherwise, what is that I think it was like 7,500 homes have been constructed.
Yeah, 7,500 homes, but then it felt like we were double counting that. Right. And honestly, once we adopt climate friendly, we're going to come back around in 2 years with a new HNA, HCA. And then I assume at that point, we also have to make sure that there's 30%. So when we have a new need, we're going to have to do this exercise again.
That is correct. Yeah. So, and that's so per the draft rules. Yeah, you would kind of be re-evaluating your overall housing need every 8 years. You know, if that's the update cycle for
Okay.
HNAs. And yeah, and it would be identifying. Okay, so now we need how many more homes, and then identifying climate-friendly areas proportionate to that additional.
Okay. And is there, so, there's obviously a lot of timelines out there, and it's, as I mentioned yesterday, we would we'd like more time and some alignment with those, because the climate friendly are due June 2024 to be adopted. Our scenario planning, which I assume is going to also be based on our climate friendly, is due 6 months later to be adopted. And then 2 years after that, we're going to have to repeat the process again as part of our our housing capacity analysis, the new HNA. It feels like there needs to just be some better alignment. Otherwise, we're going to be repeating everything over and over. And that's all we're going to be doing for the next 4 years. And I understand, we need to be making sure that we're, planning for our housing need, but there seems to be a lot of redundancy in all of that. So just something to think about in terms of time frame on that. And I will let somebody else go now, because it looks like Al also has his hand up. But before I leave, I just wanted to say thank you for holding this and having so many staff available for us, even though short notice, but thank you.
You bet. And I before we move on, I do want to respond that, this is maybe a good example of where that work program option makes good sense for Eugene, where you can sort of lay out, hey, look, scheduling wise, we're looking at these things. Here's a more logical order, and that would give you the ability to kind of tailor that. Obviously, It's subject to review and approval by the commission, but this is exactly the kind of circumstance we're talking about for the work.
Yeah, and I appreciate that option is in there. And I think, yes, I think that would be somewhere where we try to seek better alignment. My only concern with that is, one, it's up to the department to tell us yes or no. And two, we have to start our projects assuming we're going to get a no, and that we only have the time given to us in the rule. And I think we would start the projects differently if we knew we had more time.
Okay.
So that's just something to think about, practical. We would probably do the public outreach differently. We would, so just think about that. But thank you.
So
Bill, go ahead.
Butt in here a little bit, Bill Holmstrom. I think we've heard pretty clearly that we're going to need to make some changes in that transition period over the next couple of years to really space things out a little bit more. It's just, I think, frankly, Eugene's letter is very clear about the timelines for things and what it really takes to make things happen. And, we started out this process basically given marching orders, do it as fast as possible, be urgent, go. Where our commission wanted these rules adopted yesterday, is basically is what we're dealing with, So, but, I think yesterday was a good meeting with them. And to get them to understand, it's going to take a lot, between now and when we get to when these rules are kind of everyday implementation. And I think we're going to plan. I expect to make some changes to provide, I think, that base flexibility on the standard dates, but also in the work program and how that works.
All right. Thanks, Bill. I think now we can move on to our next person, Al Johnson.
Hi, Kevin, and Cody and Jeremy, everybody else. You guys must be really pooped. This has been quite a week. I've just been amazed watching you just carry through with not only this, but the legislature and everything else. I did watch most of yesterday's meeting. I was pulled away for a while. I think I missed Kevin's presentation, but in the question period after that, I heard good things. So my general sense is that things went pretty well yesterday, and that you're on track. So I'm don't have any comments on that. Just a couple of things. One having to do with the legal review process. As you know, I I have my sort of policy issues, but I also want to be sure that in this rulemaking, we don't get ahead of anything that would actually require an amendment to a goal or an amendment to a statute. And I think you've got that pretty well aligned right now. And that'll be one of the things that the Attorney General's office will be looking at. That legal review process, is that entirely informal and verbal, or are you going to want to have anything written out in the way of questions, or are you going to get back a formal opinion or anything that goes in the record about that, or is that just pretty much between you and them?
I guess I can speak to that to a degree, but I'll if others want to jump in from the team. The process is relatively informal. It's iterative with DOJ staff, Department of Justice staff, and we obviously we try to be as thorough as possible. And so I guess for anybody who's interested in or identified concerns or legal issues, now is the time to let us know what potential issues you see, because that's going to help us with that legal review to really thoroughly vet what we're coming up with. Bill, go ahead. Did you want to add something?
Well, yeah, I want to be clear. We've been meeting with counsel all along over the last year as we've been developing the rules, and issues have bubbled up. We've said, oh gosh, we should look into that, and we go and talk with him about it. And sometimes it takes him a little while to think through that and turn it around. But we've had that opportunity throughout. He doesn't want to see the rules as we're drafting them kind of continuing, which is why he likes to see them like kind of all together near the end. That's why we have this process the way we're doing it. But he's already looked at Division 44, for example, which was been settled pretty well for a while. He's already looked at that. So there's kind of a chunk that's mostly done. He'll look at it again in February, but I don't want to make it sound like, we've just been out here doing whatever, and then the lawyers come in at the last minute and say, whoa, you guys are totally off base. I don't think we're going to have that problem, fingers crossed.
Okay, yeah, that's how I kind of understood it, Bill. My question really was whether it was going to go into something a little more formal. It sounds like it's not, and I'm fine with that. I don't have an issue with that. My other questions is kind of off the wall, I have to admit, but I was looking over some of the things that are happening in the legislature, and also it took me back to your November meeting on the wildfire recovery, the wildfire hazard mapping process that's going on right now. Department of Forestry's got proposed rules out there. They're going to do mapping of wildfire areas, that kind of thing. And the consequences of that are going to be a lot of setbacks and other kinds of protections. And I just took a look at the rules this morning, and I couldn't tell whether they might affect the ability to achieve densities in CFA areas or outside of them. Because I think, as I looked at the rules, there's no reason why most of South Eugene and most of Bend and a good part of Bandon wouldn't end up, being mapped as high risk wildfire areas. And that I'm just wondering how that's, or if that's being thought about.
It's a good question. Oh, go ahead, Matt. You're more expert in this area.
I was going to say, perhaps I'll mention that, because as you were talking, I was just looking over the PowerPoint, because we're presenting to LCDC this morning, and I'm part of the group on our wildfire work. I'm not sure that I agree with the characterization you have as far as the rules that are currently working and what the bill currently does as far as creating setbacks. I don't think that's quite what it does. The bill that was passed 762 and the work that's going on at forestry and fire marshals would create rules for defensible space. So what kind of some of the landscaping you would do around a house and the kinds of materials you would use to build the house, but would not create a setback where houses had to be separated from other houses. I don't believe.
Glad somebody's thinking about that. That's good. Thanks, Matt.
And the other nuance that gets a little tricky is that most of those pieces would kick in the wildfire urban interface.
Mm-hmm.
And almost by definition, an urban growth boundary is not an interface, it's urban.
No, but I that's why I took at the rules. I just did a search through the rules, and they do talk about urban growth boundaries, but they don't say that this doesn't affect properties inside urban growth boundaries. and an awful lot of land inside urban growth boundaries, based on my experience with wildfire risk management and mapping, there's a lot of wildland urban interface inside urban growth boundaries around the state. I actually drafted language that's now in the Coos County Comprehensive Plan dealing with that issue in the unincorporated part of Bandon, known as the Donut Hole, which is currently covered with gorse. And it was very helpful for me to be able to go back to those folks in Bandon and tell them, you better get that gorse out of there before they finish the mapping, because otherwise you're going to lose about 2,000 homes worth of residential lands inventory. So in South Eugene, as I'm sure Alyssa will concur, is been identified as South Eugene Hills are they're tinderbox.
Yeah, and I think what our fires in 2020 taught us is that it's actually not the trees that are the danger, it's the houses. You know, the houses ignite, the next house ignites the next house, and the trees survive. So
I think of the trees as kind of the kindling from my Boy Scout years, you know, they kind of get it going, and then, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just jump in to say, you know, I think it is, I'm familiar with Eugene South Hills, actually lived there for a few years, but I think it's pretty unlikely we're going to see a climate friendly area designated in an area with steep slopes and, you know, within the wildland to urban interface. And I will note, you know, for climate friendly areas, at least, you know, there is language that speaks to goal 7 and not locating climate friendly areas and areas subject to, you know, hazard. You know, the devil's in the details, but in general, that's not an area that I would think would be a strong candidate as a climate friendly area. They need to be well served by transit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I think it's a good thing for us to be thinking about. Absolutely.
That's all.
All right. Are there other questions?
I'll go ahead and jump in I'll go ahead, Jeremy. I'll go after you and raise my hand in proper.
Thanks. Hey, thanks guys for everyone for doing this again today. Appreciate it. And the last one and yesterday's meeting as well. Kevin, wanted to ask you about, and I sent an email about this. I'm trying to reconcile. So you did a great job yesterday kind of walking through that whole UGB expansion process as it relates to housing needs and the CFAs. And I was just wondering, because I'm just pulling up my email here so I can reference the specific sections of the rule. In the Division 8 rules, there's the 660-008-001-02A. And I think that's the piece that you've been referring to, saying that the local government shall determine housing capacity within the CFA area for the purpose of meeting identified housing needs as required by Goal 10 and yada yada in a manner consistent with ORS 197-2965. So that makes a lot of sense to me, and I think that is sort of underlying your slides from yesterday. But in the Division 12 rules, there's also several references to assumptions. Both in 0340 and 0350. And like, for example, I'll read 03502A says that a city and county must assess the ability of lands within the urban growth boundary to accommodate the additional levels of growth expected. Cities and counties must assume that future development of climate-friendly areas and more land efficient and transportation efficient patterns of development across the urban area will be different and more intensive than existing patterns of development. I'm just trying to understand how those things kind of sync up and if they are at all contradictory to each other and how you guys are thinking about that. Thanks.
Thanks for the question, Jeremy. I think you've identified an issue that we do need to do further work on to clarify the relationship here. We know that what we're doing in relation to housing can't conflict with existing rule and statute. And that's why we've been careful about highlighting, 197296 sub 5, because those provisions are pretty much carved in stone as far as we're concerned. I will note that the section you cited, 0350, is lodged within the transportation rule. And that may be more the distinction we're getting at is in terms of how we plan for transportation infrastructure, which is different from how we plan for housing. But Bill, I'll give you an opportunity to jump in if there's more you want to say on this question.
Yeah, so 340 is about what land use assumptions planners should be making when making transportation plans. And I think this actually came up on Wednesday. There was a transportation planner from City of Salem who was asking, like, should we assume the housing, that we assume, with the HNAs, or the housing that we assume with climate friendly areas? And a good question. I think Kevin and I need to sit down, like, figure out what's the right policy approach here from that transportation planning perspective. I kind of go back and forth on it. The thoughts I've had over it. So I don't know. I think we still need to think about it, and we want to make sure that we're consistent and that we're not, coming into conflict, particularly with any of those housing rules that we've worked. I mean, Kevin's worked hard to make sure that we're consistent with the statute and everything. We'll make sure we do that.
Great. Thanks. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You bet. You bet. Paige?
Yeah, Paige West, I'm the senior planner for Rogue Valley Transportation District and on the RAC. I wanted to talk a little bit about the TSP inclusion of transportation options and having some allowances for development credits or ways to mitigate parking impacts. And an example is, I've been looking at the comments from community members, and I do see that there's a little bit of pushback on having no parking in I think it's a quarter mile of transit routes. But it doesn't really give the alternative of, okay, well, do we then provide transit passes to all of the residents or employees that are within a quarter mile? Do we provide car share, bike share, scooters in those areas? And it seems like that would be a good way to tie transportation options or a mobility wallet or providing alternatives in those areas specifically. Ideally, I'd like to see it throughout the entire climate friendly area zone, that it be required that we have ways to support the citizens that are going to be living and working in these areas. So I also wanted to bring up that in previous RAC materials, and I've got RAC 5 and RAC 6 up. And so I just want to harken back to those so long ago. It seems like forever ago, but in the meeting packet 5, it does reference the sustainable transportation strategy and the vision, and that 50% of employees will need to be participating in a transportation options or trip reduction program by 2050 in order to meet the vision and the goals that were set out originally in that. And then in RAC 5, our meeting packet included proposals for inclusion into the rules. And this is on page 34. And it does have under transportation options that the locally adopted trip reduction ordinance for employers over 100 to be consistent with DEQ would have to have a transportation options program. And I think the DEQ is pursuing that. But it goes on to say that the rules would also require a transportation options plan to focus on priority populations, that there could be an impact fee discount for developments that include a TDM program. And then lastly, that a development review process could allow investments and commitments to TDM programs in place of improvements to motor vehicle infrastructure. And I was very supportive of that initial language early on, but it seems like it's been taken out. And currently the TSP amendment process simply needs to identify existing programs and deficiencies, but it doesn't require that the cities or the developers or any of the land uses within the CFA go any further than just simply identifying a TDM program that exists. And I'm concerned about that because the cities will be very overwhelmed by all of the other work that they need to do. And I don't see them taking up this elected opt-in, I'm going to require a transportation options program if they don't have it in the rules and require that they do that. They will most likely only do what's required in the rules, which at this point is from the draft that you currently have out, identify a TDM program that exists in the community, which actually is what they mostly have to do now in TSPs, but it doesn't go further to require that we look at trip reduction strategies. So I'd like to recommend that staff go back to that original language and look at how you can tie it perhaps to the transit corridor specifically, where you're looking at eliminating most of the parking, but also ideally, like I said, expanding it out to the entire climate friendly area so that we have incentive programs for people to actually do mode shift. I think we're doing a lot of facility planning and we're doing a lot of zoning, but we're not really thinking about people and human behavior and how difficult and stubborn we are to change behavior. And maybe we will be out of jobs in our transportation options programs in 50 years, but I really think you're going to need to rely on these programs to help people facilitate their shift to bike-ped transit in the next 10 and 20 years. It's not going to be easy. And so having these programs and having these incentives available for people, I think will truly be a bonus on top, but it's not required like it was in our initial language so many months ago. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Paige. And I think this is one of those places where the lines of which agency does what kind of get confused, or not confused, but I'll put it this way. I think our original ideas for rules on this were a little bit different and stronger, probably closer to what you were talking about. And I think we had some conversations with, basically ours is DEQ. DEQ is, moving forward with their program, and we're trying to be complementary to what they're doing. And I don't think there's a conflict there. We also talk with ODOT, and I think they see their role as leading these efforts with transportation options providers across the state. And I'd say the rules that we ended up with are we're put together in close coordination with ODOT staff. So I'll let Evan speak to this as well, because he was plugged into some of those conversations as well.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks, Paige. I appreciate that. I certainly agree with the premise that the programs are critical in terms of getting to our mode change. So I agree with that. I do want to clarify that the parking rules are about how much is mandated. So developers may provide a bunch of parking near transit, or they may not, up to the parking maximums as required. And our experience is some developers find the cheapest thing to do is to give people transit passes, as you're aware and kind of understand from the Northwest Portland experience and other places. So having the mobility wallets, doing that is great. The flexible commute benefits are an option under option 2 in the parking reform, kind of in coordination with DEQ's efforts. So agree with that. And yeah, I guess those were the clarifications I would add on top of what Bill has said.
If I could clarify a little bit, because we have been working with DEQ, we as in the transportation options programs and with ODOT to try and clarify their roles as well. And DEQ does not have authority over cities. They have the ability to, through the ECO rule, only impact employers of a certain size. In the Portland metro area, they're trying to expand that statewide. Most likely it's going to land at employers that are over 100 employees will be required to adopt a transportation options program. But DEQ has no authority over the cities. In very much this process, I see there is requirements being created that will impact the cities. ODOT also does not have authority to require TDM programs unless it's in like an IAMP area. But that has to be in close coordination with the cities as well. And the cities, again, they have to adopt certain rules that coincide with any IAMP requirement to have a trip reduction program. So I very much see DLCD as being really the only one in that multi-jurisdictional group as having the authority to ask for and require these types of programs within the CFAs. I think, again, if it's not drafted in a way so that it's required as part of this process, I really don't see that the cities will elect to do it on their own. They have a tremendous amount of work and uphill climb to get the other elements of this rulemaking accomplished. Any type of program is most likely going to take a back burner approach. And we can't require it unless it's in the TSP. We as in the transportation options or the transit agencies, and oftentimes even affordable housing, we can't require it unless it's in the transportation system plan. So I think it's important. If you could just go back and look at some of that language, that stronger language, and it's a low cost, efficient way for us to do the mode shift that you're looking for. It's very, very low cost. And oftentimes the employer or the residential area, such as the Housing Authority of Jackson County, they have bus passes for all of their residents. And that's a partnership that they've built with RBTD for the last 10 years. They build it into their grants. So they actually don't even pay for it themselves, but it's a perpetual bus pass program that they've built into their grants. We have large employers that are also electing to do transit passes, but it's completely voluntary. And so I think that if we continue to make it voluntary, we most likely won't reach that 50% that you're looking for in your STS vision. We probably will get to maybe 10 or 15% in your STS vision. And so I'd like to see it, moving in tandem with your facility improvements and your transit service improvements. We should also have things like car share, bike share, transit passes, et cetera. They all work together.
Yeah, thank you, Paige. I think, we completely agree. And I think, Evan, let's make a note to go back around with DEQ folks and Stephanie over at ODOT and see if we can maybe revisit some of this. It's been a while, I think, since we just talked about this with them. So let's do that. And then Cody, I also want to, I think the other angle of this is programs are an effective way, like you've been saying, Paige, to help jurisdictions meet their overall goals. In fact, it's a necessary piece of that. And do we want to get there, Cody, about the VMT targets and meeting those targets and how programs fit into that, or do we not want to go down that road right now?
Well, we could. I was just going to mention we got a letter from the transportation options group in the commission packet, and that we include them in that talk with our counterparts at DEQ and ODOT, because this is one of those issues that it's a team effort, and it straddles a lot of different jurisdictions. It's going to take locals, it's going to take DLCD, it's going to take DEQ and ODOT. So it's been one that we've been coordinating on, and clearly I'm hearing, let's go back and revisit that, because we had good meetings, I think, to get to this spot. But thank you, Paige, for raising that and championing this whole effort throughout. We appreciate your involvement there. So I think let's just follow up on that. And I'll just, for the VMT and the GHG targets, yeah, it's software and hardware. So you need programs, and you need facilities, the infrastructure, and then you need the land use and the policies. So we allow for that, and we encourage that. And that's the centerpiece of the TPR draft rules now, is to allow for the policies to be added to the project list of facilities, and to show your VMT reductions, and demonstrate that through land use changes, policies such as TO, and the facilities.
Yeah, and the other thing, I think, not only are there multiple state agencies involved, but at the local level, I think the other thing that's kind of difficult is, I think a lot of cities don't see themselves as transportation options providers. It's they've got separate agencies or entities that work on that, either the transit agency or other regional entities that do that work. And so sometimes I think there's that at that local implementation level, there's also who does what, kind of struggles. Yeah, same with public transportation in general.
All right, good stuff. Looks like Alyssa, you have another question?
Yeah, that was a great conversation, and I just thought I'd bring it back to the 30% again, because that's where I'm thinking about. Kevin, this is a good question for you. I think now that I understand kind of that initial calculation, and we can get to our number, when we're looking at distributing that, and we say downtown, we're thinking of doing downtown and maybe a couple corridors if we have to accommodate, that theoretical carrying capacity. Do you then also get to subtract existing units? So, if we said, hey, downtown's going to be one of our climate friendly areas, we think the theoretical carrying capacity is X, but there are already, 1,000 units downtown. Do we get to subtract that because they're existing? Maybe you need to think about it and look at the rule, but that's a question
Sure. So the clear answer I can give you now is no, based on current rule language. And it's something that we should think about, but I want to be clear. Our goal is at least 30%. And, basically the STS is looking for more than 30% after 2035, the statewide transportation strategy. And for that reason, I think I would be a little concerned to say, well, you just hit 30% and then you're golden. Because we need to see more of this development just overall in cities. But the point is a good one, and I also have been doing some thinking, and I'm not quite sure how to. The next draft of rules really needs to address the provision that allows for, say, high density residential or high employment areas to be included as CFAs. And so how does that influence the calculation, which isn't really clear in the current draft? That's something that I recognize needs further clarification. But that's just kind of off the top of my head thinking about, whether we count existing development. I mean, honestly, we're setting 30% as like, that's kind of the minimum that we need to get to. And so I guess just, I'm just a little concerned with saying, okay, we just get to there and then, everything's going to be great. But that kind of accounting is going to be really important in terms of the housing production strategies and the work that you're doing. And what I'm really hoping to see is that as cities are successful, we can share good tools and help each other to kind of move in the right direction, and that can be a sort of an iterative learning process over time. Yeah, so that's all I can say at this point.
No, thank you. And I would offer, I mean, if you want to reach out to me, and Heather probably is really familiar with, she's been thinking about some of those additional areas, probably closer to the university where there's higher density housing, but not really mixed use. And could those qualify? So we'd be happy to, do a flyover with you and kind of show you, and maybe if that would, be helpful at all in tightening up how that calculation is done, just please reach out. So we'd be happy to do that. I also wanted to assure Al that we're not planning to put any climate friendly areas in the South House. So.
Thank you. All right, I appreciate that, Alyssa. Other questions? I don't see any other hands raised, but. Jeremy.
Hey, thanks. And so, sorry, since no one else is asking a question, if it's okay, I'll take an opportunity to, I just really trying to learn. And I think, you've heard us raise some concerns about the minimum density requirements, maybe actually being too ambitious, and that could actually preclude some development in areas where they maybe be able to hit a higher density level than they're currently at, but not as high as what's required by the rules. So I actually was just, and I'm not a land use planner, and so I don't fully understand how all these density requirements actually play out on the ground. And so I was just, maybe I can throw out a scenario to you or to any of the experts here in the room, many land use planning experts in the audience here as well, just of how this would work. So like between the standard path and the alternative path that are available. So say a city identifies an area that it thinks would be a good climate friendly area because of walkability and access to amenities and things like this. And they kind of look at the existing density levels, they look at development patterns and trends in their community, they do their equity analysis and all of that. And they come and they say, well, look, we've identified this area right now. It's at like 15 units per acre. We've done analysis of the type of development patterns and where we think things are going, and we think that we could see a lot of developments at 20 units per acre. Maybe 10 years down the road, we'd see at 25, but our market's really not producing that right now. But we really want to designate this area, and it's going to be an increase in density, and it's going to create opportunities for more people to live in these walkable communities. Is there a path for them to do that, or is it, well, you have to hit 25, or you have to show us you can hit 40 jobs and units per acre in the alternative path, and so we're really not going to allow you to more incrementally get up to that level of density?
Thanks for the question, Jeremy. I think I can speak to that to some degree, but certainly want to open up the floor for others to speak to it. So this is a big part of the reason why we amended the rules to allow for what I've been calling the satellite CFAs. So the current draft of the rules does require local governments to establish a primary climate friendly area, which would be the most intensive, kind of zone. And I think the minimum land area requirement is 25 acres within that primary CFA. But then local governments have more flexibility to designate other climate friendly areas elsewhere in the community at a lesser standard. Now it has to meet one of those recipes, if you will, for climate friendly area, but that could be the least intensive zone. So if you were to follow the prescriptive path, I believe that's 15 units per acre and building heights of 50 feet. And so for those areas, that would be a path over time that you could see. Presumably, you could see, okay, we're gonna go with that satellite area at a kind of the lower end of the density scale. And oh wow, that area is really taken off. We think there's more potential there. That rezoning could occur and allow for more intensive uses, 10 years later, if it turns out. Of course, it's going to be a trade-off because some stuff's going to get built at the lesser density, and then you're going to have, less areas to work with. But I do see this as potentially being an incremental solution that that local governments could use. Carl, did you want to comment on this as well, or did you have a separate question?
It's a separate question.
Before we move to you, I'll just open up the floor if there's any other practitioners who want to respond to Jeremy's question or kind of speak to this issue. Feel free to do so. All right, seeing none, let's go ahead and move on to Carl's question. I like your backdrop, by the way. That's beautiful.
Thank you. It's up on Mount Ashland.
Nice.
I wanted to re-ask a question I asked Wednesday, and I think the answer I kind of got was that the staff people that were on the call at that point, some of them had dropped off, and it wasn't the best people to answer it weren't still on the call, and hopefully they're on the call today. So I figured I'd re-ask, and it's really about tools for two types of tools that I see being required in the rules for local governments to implement these rules. And one is VMT reduction tools, for measuring VMT reduction. So, you know, I know our models, like at a regional scale, can measure VMT. I don't think they do a great job of it, but they can measure VMT at a regional scale. But when you get down to an individual development, we don't really have any tools to measure VMT impacts of individual developments. In the state of Oregon, I know California has done quite a bit of work on this, and they took several years to develop those. And then the other types of tools I'm interested in are performance standards. We're going to have some different performance standards than we've used in the past, and there are some, you know, there are some out there, but I don't know. I think they're difficult to implement at this point. So I guess I'd like to hear what plans DLCD has to help local governments develop these types of tools. Yeah, that's the question.
Well, that must be aimed at me. So thanks for the questions, Carl. And I'll just say that we are working closely with the ODOT Transportation Planning Analysis Unit on the upgrades and, you know, the modeling tools for the VMT at the regional scale, also at the TSP local, you know, city scale. And there are, as you say, a host of tools to estimate VMT in various across the country and world, state. There's a lot of stuff out there. So we have been working closely with the Oregon Model Steering Committee. I think it's called this, I don't know, they changed it, but they kept the same acronym. It's OMSC, but I can never remember the new name. So yeah, we're working closely with them, and that's one of a high priority project. We had a subcommittee on greenhouse gas to look at the needed updates to tools, and we did a white paper and a gap analysis just showing, you know, where are the suite of tools in use at the state right now at various different levels, you know, anywhere from planning to corridor to project, and what would be the needs with future policy on greenhouse gas. And we of course knew we had a target rule, we had the VMT stuff that we're working on. So we were really active in that. And so we'll be working on that to get that up and going. So I think that we feel really good about that. And we have a lot of really, really smart people helping out on that. It's kind of cross agencies and cross, you know, different cities helping out there. For the performance standards stuff, there is tools out there, as you say, like California's got a really detailed program of how they do performance standard based on VMT. So there's a lot of really great guidance that came out of that work effort. And I noticed that like the state of Colorado is moving towards greenhouse gases, reduction programs for their MPOs, and they directly reference a lot of that stuff that's coming out of California. But we will be we're putting together now, the city of Portland is working on some mobility standard stuff with Fair and Peers. And then of course, Metro has ongoing work on mobility targets and coming up with different performance standards there. Then the city of Eugene, Rob Interfeld, has reached out to us, said they're working on the similar stuff. So what we're going to do later this spring is hold a peer review or a peer exchange to kind of share with cities across the state what Portland and Eugene and Metro and then maybe others are working on in that space. And that's, I think, just kind of getting our foot in the door to go down, looking towards the guidance and the tool updates we're going to need to support that. So I think we feel confident that the tools are there. We just got to kind of figure out which are the ones that, and of course the rules don't specify which one you have to use. So we're looking to support that. And that's a long-winded answer to say that we're working on it.
Thanks for that, Cody. For me, I'm a traffic engineer here at the city of Medford. And so, those tools are critical to how this rule impacts me. So I'm glad to hear you're working on some stuff.
Yeah, and if anyone tuned in to our commission meeting yesterday, the director of ODOT came and we were working on a $15 million funding package to help support this rulemaking. And a chunk of that's going to be reserved for the tools and the guidance that's going to be needed. And then, of course, most of it direct assistance to stand the stuff up.
All right, thanks, Cody. It looks like Bob's got a question or comment.
I do. I was hoping that you might say more about what you're thinking in terms of regional scenario planning. I think the commission came up with the new term of art, regional something, in its discussion yesterday. I think a number of us, City of Salem, were pushing that either we ought not do regional scenario planning or make it optional. And it sounds like there's some in-between hybrid that you're talking about. And so I'm curious if you can say more about that. And then I had a additional comment about that.
Well, I think that the regional something is our signal to say that, scenario planning as it's rolled out in the state to date, I think that it has a certain connotation with what Portland Metro did, and that would be running a model that doesn't have a transportation network, coming up with using the Green Step or Vision Eval modeling tools to set, a strategy, and then to adopt performance measures to show implementation towards that strategy, right? You have this kind of overall, and Bob, all this stuff. So I think what we're looking at is that's one way of getting there, but there are other ways to get there. If Kaiser and Salem wanted to do concurrent TSPs and plug those into a travel model and connect that to the VMT GHG target, and really start off with a high level agreement of what's the agreed upon levels of ambition across different levers, transit level service, bike ped, mode share, those kind of high level things that drove the Metro strategy, then that's fine. I mean, that really is kind of making a hybrid between an RTSP and a regional scenario plan. But what our intention is to not make it cumbersome and to make it a flexible process, and looking at all the required changes in the TPR for a region, doing CFAs. That, of course, we've heard 2040 land use pattern was done, and that was a key part of that. So we're on that, and we're going to be doing that. That's a necessary first step to any of this work. But I think that we're just trying to look at making it flexible enough so we can get to where we want to go in the TPR without adding a redundant planning process in the front end of it, and say, okay, we thought about it for 2 years and now we're ready to do our TSP updates. That was never our intention. So the regional something that I tossed out there, and I knew immediately I'd be hearing about that for quite a while, was that, yeah, just looking at a flexibility approach to getting there.
Well, that's encouraging. I mean, the things that I've struggled with are, what are the decisions that would require some sort of new decisions that would require some sort of regional entity or arrangement? Because we've got a lot in place right now with regional transportation plans and regional economic analyses and housing needs analyses that I think provide an adequate baseline. The real question is what needs to be done regionally that then can't be done locally. I mean, the big things that we're asking communities to do, I think, is identify CFAs and program or try to get a lot more development in those areas. And I think those are decisions that cities are going to want to make for themselves and rightfully should, and get pretty intimidated with the notion that we're asking that be done regionally. So I'm encouraged by that. My thought, hopefully constructive for you, is to think about those other things as coordinated planning assumptions. We're not asking for new decisions, we're asking to coordinate about the decisions. So I think that's something that I'd encourage you to think about. And again, the more flexibility you can give local governments, short of requiring a new regional arrangement to do this stuff, I think is going to move us forward faster.
Okay, thank you. And I think that was our intention the whole time. I mean, we never intended to have a regionally coordinated land use process involved in there. We set out the CFA rules to say, you both have to come up with your 30% if there's 2 jurisdictions in a region, hypothetically. Then you've kind of done that work locally, and those are your local values. And then what are your local values that want to drive your TSP? But at the end of the day, you've got to compare it to this regional target. And, are you getting there? And if the fingers start pointing about that's not my problem, that's where that regional coordination's got to occur. And that's where we have to have some accountability towards what's our partnership in doing this work. And
yeah, I think the modeling analysis can be done regionally, and we'll see where we get. But it doesn't require that we have regional decisions about what the land use policies are, particularly.
Thanks, Bob.
I had one more question, but I'll hold off and let other people go first.
Are there other questions? I see no other hands up. Oh, we'll get back to Bob. Looks like Damien's got a question.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Excuse me. All right, thank you. Excuse me. I had a couple of questions related to major updates to the TSP as I was reviewing the new rule under 0105. And I was discussing this with some city staff and looking at maybe a series of potential actions that might trigger a major update. So here's what I'm thinking, and you can tell me if this is incomplete or needs further fleshing out before we can answer the question. So as we were looking at 0105 and looking ahead at our current council work program for the next biennium, we're going to be looking at updating our housing capacity analysis. I think by the end of 2024, that's our deadline. But we're also going to be working in our EOA and looking at our employment lands. And I know with respect to the housing capacity analysis, if it identifies a need for land, we can't adopt it without also adopting some concurrent response to that need through rezoning, UGB expansion, or some combination of the two. So my question is, do you have any feedback on what we should be looking at in terms of what potential actions like those might trigger a major TSP update so that we can think accordingly about when we schedule that work? Because we just, as you know, or you might not know, adopted a new TSP in the fall of 2020. And I had a relating question here, pardon me. Oh, just wanted to confirm a change in horizon year might also be a major TSP update, because I think as we go forward, there's going to be a different horizon year for for our comprehensive plan that we might need to go back and address in our TSP as we do these other updates for housing and employment land. And I hope that made sense.
It does, Damien, and I can speak to part of the puzzle, but I'm going to defer to our transportation experts on a piece of that. You know, one of the things that's fundamental is to this whole effort is land use, and so I think you're thinking correctly that, you know, gosh, if we're looking at updating our EOA and our housing capacity analysis as well, and we're finding a need for UGB expansion, you know, obviously we look at efficiency measures first, what's possible. But a UGB expansion, you know, is a, you know, perfect case for why you would want to delay a TSP update, because you want to be able to plan for that newly added area. So would it trigger a requirement for a TSP update? I mean, certainly not under the current draft, but I'll defer to our transportation staff to speak further on this question.
So the way the rule is written right now is a major update is any update that includes a change to the horizon year of the TSP, update where the adoption date of the TSP is fewer than 5 years, basically if you've got an old TSP. And then the other one is newly includes a facility authorized, and we might have to change that language, as provided in Rule 830, which is the rule that talks about new roadway capacity, new significant roadway capacity. And just so folks are aware, we are making some changes to that rule that would mean that fewer facilities fall into needing that type of review than previously where it was in the draft. So just so folks are aware of that. Now those are the only triggers right now that we've got in the draft. If you think there's something that is wrong with those, or if that they, you know, that they capture something that I guess I'm not exactly sure what the issue is there. It doesn't sound like, you know, making changes to your EOAs doesn't trigger that, unless you want to move out the date of your transportation system plan when you're doing that. And then I think the other thing is, you know, what's the difference between a major and a minor TSP update? And, I'm trying to, that's another piece I think of it's basically you have to look at more stuff. I'll be honest, the way the rule's written right now is written at a time when nobody had TSPs, right? So it's basically written as if, you know, no one's got a TSP, got to start to do TSP from there. So now everyone's pretty much got a TSP, right? We're trying to write it in a way that understands that, and that you know, provides for these minor updates, which really there's no distinction now. I mean, people make small updates all the time. We're just trying to make that kind of clearer in the rule. If there's something that's not clear, or if that it doesn't really work, we can tweak that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I just had a follow-up question and I lost it here because it had something to do with the section or the new rule at 830. No, that question got answered on Wednesday. So I think that's all I have for now. So I'm going to get out of the queue in case anybody else has other questions. And I'm sorry for being late. Is it more of a free form question answer session? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, there was no dog and pony show at the beginning. It's just, we're just answering questions and hearing, you know, comments. So thank you, Damien. You know, it does beg the question in my mind, Bill, and, you know, maybe we can talk further about this, but, you know, if an area is doing if a city is doing a small UGB expansion, does it make sense to do some transportation area planning for that newly expanded area as a minor TSP update versus a major TSP update. I guess it might depend on the scale of that, but you know, I could see that being a concern for a fast-growing community like Bend.
Yeah, and I think we were, if I remember right, we were trying to talk about that in 350 as well, but I can't remember now. I think we were talking about that angle of it, and I don't know that we prescribed anything in particular. I'm trying to remember. Because frankly, I'm trying to stay out of, with my transportation planning rules, trying to stay out of getting too tangled up with existing urban growth boundary expansion rules, because it's important. There's a lot of statute and case law around that. I don't want to rock the boat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I understand that. All right. Let's see. I don't see any more hands raised. I know Bob had another question, so maybe this is a good time to go back to Bob.
Yeah, let me just offer a historic comment for you to consider, and Ben should remember this pretty well, because in 2008, when it proposed a major expansion to its urban growth boundary, one of the things that the department and commission said had to be done as part of that urban growth boundary was to comply with the transportation planning rules requirement to plan for VMT reduction. So I think the rules should, I don't know that they've changed, expect that when we do UGB amendments, we're looking at whether or not we're accomplishing our VMT reduction goals. So I would hope that's still the case. I'm a little surprised to hear us suggesting maybe that's not the case, but that's my comment. Let me shift to my question. One of the things that came up in the commission meeting yesterday was, and I think it was Director Strickler that was talking about the $15 million. And there was some comment to the effect that that planning for CFAs would not be eligible for federal transportation funding. And for those of you who don't know, I spent my career working on the TPR and the TGM program, which is federally funded. And FHWA endorses scenario planning as part of metropolitan planning to look at land use alternatives. So I'm wondering, do you have anything in writing from ODOT or FHWA that talks about whether or not planning for CFAs would be eligible or not eligible? And planning for CFAs is a many splendored thing. I mean, a lot of what you're asking for is for communities to do the more detailed planning for bike, ped, and transit and street changes in those areas. Those strike me as exactly the sorts of things that are eligible currently for TGM funds and should be eligible for federal funds. So is there something more in writing, or can you clarify what is being said about this?
I think the important thing to me, I mean, we all, I think, have the same thought because we do have a code assistance program federally funded, as you say. And what I heard him say was strictly for land use. And I think we're still working this out with ODOT, and DLCD is going forward with a budget request. Of course, we have funding in hand to do the CFA designation study, and we're working on that right now. But it's the phase 2. Our agency's intent is we're going through right now a pretty significant budget request to fund the CFA zoning. So that's our intention, is to do that. I guess I would say that those are ongoing talks, and I heard it as strictly for land use planning. So when we talk about coordinated land use planning, and we have funding in hand to do this regional scenario planning or the regional something planning, then we, of course, there'll be some land use stuff involved there, but that's just something that we're, working out between the agencies to stand up the program. And I don't know, Bill, it looks like you've got a couple thoughts on this.
No, I think you covered the FHWA thing. I mean, Bob, we all agree. I mean, we've been doing it for 20 plus 30 years, with the transportation growth management using federal FHWA money. to do coordinated land use and transportation planning. We all know that there's a connection there. And I think we just need to continue to remind our agency partners about that and work on that. So that's what we're doing. In terms of your first point about, I think that the UGB piece, I want to draw a distinction. The rules and the draft rules in Rule 350 right now do require, at the time of doing an urban growth boundary expansion, that local governments have an updated, have an acknowledged TSP that meets the updated rules. And then they also have to have submitted all their regular reports, the reports that talk about how they're doing against the set of performance measures. So those pieces of it are required. I think that the nuance that I understood Damien to be asking about is when they're doing a UGB expansion, are they required to then also update their transportation system plan at that time? Maybe I misunderstood, Damien, your question or where that conversation was going, but I don't think we necessarily say that, but you do have to have an acknowledged TSP that meets the updated rules.
That wasn't my original question, but that does help me understand it better. I think mine was more what amount of updates to our current comprehensive plan would not trigger necessarily a concurrent update. And I just had a related question to that. And I think it really falls in that category of, are you doing a major update to your TSP? If we're not doing a major update, for example, if we're, and I'm going to kind of use this as a different example or a scenario, if we adopt a new EOA and find that we can meet our employment land needs with our current supply with some changes in rezoning, and that does not have, say, concurrent changes to our TSP that involve arterial roads or new highways, then I think we're looking at maybe a minor update to our TSP. And that's a very imperfect hypothetical, but I was just trying to think this through in terms of what we've got coming up on our horizon with our work program. So, okay, thank you.
All right. Any more questions or comments? Damien.
Right, pardon me. So just with respect to next steps. So after today's meeting, the team is going to go back and make final changes to the next draft. And then that version is going to go to the DOJ for their review, with the goal then of having the version that will be heard by the commission posted by March 1st would that be through the Secretary of State's online bulletin?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, you got that all right.
Okay. Yeah, we have to have it in our rules coordinator hands after DOJ has gone through the review in the middle of the month, kind of close to the end of February, so that she can work with Secretary of State to get it in that bulletin on the 1st of March. That's correct.
Okay. All right. That might be my very last question of the day. Thank you.
Sure. I'll just reiterate too that, even that draft, it's not a final draft, right? I mean, this is the beginning of the hearing process, and we'll have the ability to make changes, after that point. And in fact, that's in part why we have two hearings. We have the initial hearing late March, early April, and then the adoption hearing in May. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Any other questions or comments? Bob, go ahead.
I have a number. I can talk as Evan can talk about parking forever. I would be happy to continue this conversation, but I'm going to hold my tongue, but mostly say I think this format of having this kind of online discussion is very helpful in working through the details. So I hope you'll keep this in mind as we move forward over the next several months.
Thanks, Bob. I agree. I think this has been super helpful. Yeah, I think maybe we've learned something from the pandemic in terms of how to engage in more creative ways. So appreciate everyone attending today. I'll maybe give it a little more time just to make sure there aren't any lingering questions out there. But if there aren't any further, I guess I'm a little unclear. We've said we'll be available between 9 and 11:30. I'm willing to stay on the line in case people drop in, but if there aren't any further questions, others don't need to feel the obligation to hang on here. Cody, did you want to say something?
I was wondering if you're going to read us a story or something while we wait out the next hour.
Yeah, once upon a time, there was a climate-friendly area. No, I'm not going to do that. Bob, did you have something else?
Well, so if you're looking to fill time and keep it going, I would apologize. I missed the first part of the discussion, and I think Alyssa was asking, or you were just answering the question about TSP deadlines. And I'm wondering if you might, for my benefit, maybe others, kind of summarize where you're at. I was hearing the commission, particularly the chair, say, yes, we ought to have deadlines. So where is the department going on that?
Yeah, I think we've got some work to do based on our commission's discussion yesterday about setting some timelines out for local governments to do TSP updates. I think the issues that we identified with making that happen haven't changed, which is we've got to be able to help local governments pay for them. $15 million will go a long way to making that happen. That's probably not going to be everything that we need. And it's not going to happen in a short time frame in terms of a year or two. Obviously, it's going to take a few more years than that. And so I think we still need to have some work to do to, I think, assess where local governments are at right now with their TSPs. That's something I think the state needs to do. And to really scope that out, and that necessarily isn't necessarily going to happen during the rulemaking process. So, it's going to be a period over the next couple of years. Is going to be, like I said, a period of transition from where we've been to where we're going, and it's going to be a little bit different and rocky potentially at times. So I'm trying to, I'm trying to couch it in a way of like we're going to need some flexibility and wiggle room to make all the stars are not going to line up in terms of the staffing, in terms of the financing, in terms of the procurement, in terms of all the different things that have to come together to make projects like that happen. They never happen on schedule, on time, on budget. So it's just going to be a process for the next couple of years to make that happen.
Well, let me repeat the pitch that I think I and others have made, which is, at a minimum, you ought to tie this to the next update of regional transportation plans. We're spending millions, or we will be spending millions, to add that next increment of planning. And it seems silly to me that we would have MPOs plan for 5 more years of growth and not think about how we implement CFAs or reduce VMT. So I think that's a logical place to start, is let's have work programs that require that local governments be integrating the planning that we're asking for here into that next RTP update.
No, Bob, I think you're right that the RTP cycle is a good criteria to use to figure out where we put our resources first, and then how that works, and that's a way of organizing that maybe makes sense. I just want to highlight that the climate friendly area is a kind of a separate timeline than transportation system plan updates. So obviously there are pieces of that work together, but we expect that climate friendly area studies are going to be happening in this biennium. That's correct, Kevin? And then going into designation and implementation shortly thereafter.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if I'm getting my dates right, the study deadline at which the CFA studies would be due is June 30, 2023, which is the end of this biennium. And then we'd be moving into the next biennium for the actually zoning piece, which is what Cody was alluding to, the next funding request to support local government work.
I think I understand that, and I think that's the right thing to emphasize, is kind of integrating that with the transportation planning that we're otherwise going to be doing is what I'm asking for. And of course, the other thing that we're kind of leaving undone for TSPs is meeting those pretty hefty VMT reduction targets. CFAs are, I think, essential to us getting there, but we still need a big program of all the things, including, as Paige was suggesting, TDM, TO programs that get us to where we need to be.
Well, I'll add to this that we did in the monitoring and reporting rules, the 900s, synced up the reports to ask for them regionally and to be in sync with the RTP cycle for each region. So trying to, we don't have authority over MPOs, but we certainly realize the value in that platform. And, as much as we can, I'm encouraging folks to do the work at the same time. So we, expect to be doing the performance target setting for actions and the reporting on that, that would hopefully be in cycle with the RTP.
Thanks.
All right, then. I see no further questions. So yeah, feel free to go. As I say, I'll be here. I think we said we'd be here until 11:30, but no need to hang on to an empty chat room. So appreciate everyone coming today. Evan, did you want to say something?
Oh, I just said I'll be doing interpretive dance for the next 15 minutes and then a magic show from Cody. And yeah, there'll be entertainment. So
oh, sweet.
In that case, I'm staying on.
Anyone who has to stay on has to tell us your favorite joke. We'll be hanging out. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the time.
Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Thanks, Paige.
Oh, Ryan's got a shadow puppet show or something.
Ooh, that's fun.
I want people to keep in mind that we are recorded and streaming as well.
Good point.
This is going to go viral, really. We've been aiming for this forever to make one of these meetings go viral.
I struggle still, and I know I said this months ago, I'm here. I want to put together a workshop for high school kids on how this process works and, how it will lead to 10 years from now, that we are making significant change in what their number one concern is, which is climate change. And I'm still struggling how to explain. I get the land use rules. I was a mayor for 6 years. I get all the Oregon land use laws from a high level point of view, but I still struggle with how I'm going to tell kids that our generation is moving forward to improving the efficiency of how we live in this country. And part of it is, when I'm listening to this, I'm always thinking about what we teach our kids. And this is Hollywood, this is sports, this is whatever, what is the definition of success in this country and our culture when we're living, and we see like the middle class and the upper middle class living in the suburbs with a nice house and a backyard for the kids. And we see the billionaires living in these full townhouses in the middle of big cities with gold toilets and everything. And how to start moving our high school kids into a new definition, because we're not just going to get high density consumer from these high school kids in 10 years just because we mandate it, right? You know, but we want to go that direction. I also see our kids, in our case, we have an aviation program, you know, here, and we see electric taxis, you know, drone taxis coming in the future, you know, and various other kinds of transportation. I see Mexico City has a kind of it's not a monorail, but it's kind of an individual pod system that's coming around, and where you can get around. And also I see the walking centers that are coming up in Singapore and things like that, where they build a 4 or 5 city block area that includes a shopping, you know, area and everything's walkable through bridges and connections in the buildings and the way the buildings are. I wish I could show you some pictures of some stuff, but you know, these are kind of things that, you know, are we moving in that direction where I can tell kids, this is the consumer we need you to be, you know, when you're being successful in your career. And land use law doesn't really cover that, but it's kind of the foundation of it. And I know I'm repeating myself for you staff members that have heard me say this over and over again, right? But how do I create a consumer that's going to really buy into this high efficiency, high density living, you know, space? It's a struggle for me to think about, and that's not a question for you. I'm just telling you where I'm at, right? And in what my goal here is in making this work and getting us to a climate friendly culture, right? So to speak. I'm kind of just talking. So
I think that's interesting, Bill. I just want to say that I think of it completely opposite of that. I feel like what we are doing is trying to match the need of those consumers. And there's a reason why walkable, mixed use, vibrant neighborhoods cost so much, and that people are concerned with gentrification, because there's an unmet need there. And when those high school kids close their eyes and imagine where they want to go on vacation, it's probably not to a suburb and a strip mall. It's to, you know, a city that is dense and there's lots of stuff going on and there's jobs and opportunity. And, you know, at 75% of Oregon's jobs are in one of these metropolitan areas. And that's where there's certainly opportunity outside of those, you know, areas, but that is where.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, and again, you know, I look at Orenco Station, which I walked around since I started hearing this thing. I go out there a couple times and just walk around and look at the livability. And it's a walking distance bike ride to Intel. And when you have something sitting out there, you know, I think people, at least engineers, which I am, you know, would love to live in an Orenco Station if I was still in my 30s, but not downtown Portland, right? And I'm not saying that because of what downtown Portland has had trouble these last couple of years. I'm just talking about in general, because I do walk around John's Landing and things like that and see their little dog park and things like that, you know, and kind of the goofy things that they put in to try and make it natural, and it's not really there. Lens is another example of not living downtown, but out a bit, but still has a community center a community design that is walkable and things of that nature. But we also have things where it's convenient to do things because business wants things to be convenient. So, you know, for me to go into downtown Portland is not so hard, right? I'll give you an example, and maybe if I'm out of the lane here, just shut me up. For the last 3 years, I've been riding Max out of Clackamas to go to every Winter Hawks game that I can go to. I go park at the parking lot in Max, and I'm typically one of 5 cars in a 6-story parking garage, you know, that's parked there. And I ride Max up to the game. And 2 weeks ago, we had an incident on the Max train. It almost got violent, but it wasn't. It was more of a sad incident, but there was a mental health problem and a person going after somebody who was handicapped. And I almost had to get up and intervene, and I would have, but the person then got off the train when they saw people like me getting ready to get engaged in stopping this person. But at the time, I'm at the Winterhawks game, and there's my buddy from work who drives a Tesla for the last 6 years. And he shows me, because he drives me home, how easy it is to get in and out of the parking garage. So I drove there at the last game, and it took an hour, it took almost 50 minutes off my commute time to drive to Rose Quarter Park. It cost me an additional, with gas and parking fees, it cost me an additional about $21, and it saved me 2 hours of time. So my time is now valued at $10 an hour. And I'll start driving to the Winterhawks game, which, because it's convenient, it's easy, and it saves time. So it drew me out of the goal of riding mass transit. And so I'm thinking, okay, how would I have designed this thing so that it would have been better, right? That it wouldn't have taken a middle-class consumer like me and pulled me off of mass transit, which it did. So, and I'm just struggling. And again, I'm not asking you to answer this question. I'm just telling you where my mind is at right now, and how I'm trying to present this to kids on how the process works, trying to teach more depth in civics than just telling them to please vote, right?
If I could jump in, Bill, I think you raised some good questions. I posted in the chat a link that just came up on Plan Edison the other day from Todd Littman. But it's not talking about CFAs specifically, but it's talking about what he calls urban villages, which is, I think, what we're about. And one of the things is CFAs are not going to be a one-size-fits-all sorts of things, but they have some common characteristics. And I think, like Cody was saying, there are walkable, attractive places that people want to live. And I think this does a lot. What Todd's done does a lot to talk about what it takes to make them work, and would help, I think, high school students and anybody understand better what it is this stuff is all about. I understand what you're saying is, we aren't going to replace car trips. Remember, all we're doing is talking about reducing the amount of driving that people do. We do 70 to 80% of the amount of driving that we do now. So we're not eliminating cars. We're creating environments where people have lots of other choices and choose to use them.
The other thing I see a lot of, and this again is not land use, but they cut back on the green space in the thing, because they're actually growing green on the sides of buildings, on the tops of buildings, and the way things are designed to pull, and it's, I hate to say the word carbon tax, but using carbon friendly building designs, should really be more ruled than it is. As I look at the buildings that have gone up in downtown Portland, and they're just basic square, rectangular stuff, I don't see too much in environmentally friendly design space or efficiency in their design. They're just going up as fast as people can put them up, and they paint them nice colors, but that's about all I see. And maybe people can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I guess all I can say, we've heard this a lot from folks about, hey, we should be requiring LEED certified buildings and green buildings and that sort of thing. And unfortunately, we're in the position of saying, not just that's not our department, but we don't have, in this rulemaking, we don't have the legal authority to amend building code requirements. Anecdotally, I'll just say,
Totally.
Yeah, I'm aware of at least one of the new buildings where my daughter's boyfriend is living now, at the corner of MLK and Burnside, that does have a green roof. Actually, that's where they like to take their dog to do his business. So some of those have green roofs, but I understand what you're saying.
I thought it was interesting in your comment, Bob, because in the chat last time I put in about making, CFAs as a small micro village inside of an urban area. I wrote a little chat function there, and saying that, it needs to include shopping and middle-class standards of, access to stuff and its design. And the response I got from somebody was, CFAs aren't going to be that big, basically saying, no, we're not thinking about it like that. And I just left it alone, but it was just kind of interesting that I used the word micro village in my comment, but it drew one negative response.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this study process that's going to go underway in the next year, and I was heartened by Alyssa's comments. As she's got some ideas of what these things might look like in Eugene, and I think when we get communities pulling out the maps, we're going to see a variety of these things that fit local circumstances. So I'm hopeful, and I think we'll get there.
Excuse me for interrupting. We have a raised hand here. I'd like to be able to see if they can get.
Yeah, MA.
Thank you. Let me put this back down. Yeah, this was just an initial reaction to the first thing that you brought up, Bill, about how do we speak to youth and encourage different consumer choices and get them to, envision and dream of something different. And I'm wondering if, upon, starting that conversation, if I'm even framing it completely different as, we're not trying necessarily to encourage you to be a better consumer or more conscious consumer. And I think the issue is, that word consumer. It seems very kind of like me centric, and when you frame it that way, it's like, how do we continue to take, but in a more sustainable way, but maybe framing it as like, how do we encourage better like citizenship and make it more of about how are you giving back to your community and how do you see yourself as part of a network. So instead of encouraging conscious consumers and better consumers, but better citizens, and like you said, encouraging more civic participation and kind of a collective responsibility to the well-being of the public, and using that messaging when talking about how we're changing our land use patterns, building more densely and encouraging like a village mentality. It's about how we're giving back to the land, creating more space for more opportunities for ecological, restoration and regeneration, while providing more opportunities to people, so that everyone is better off in the end, especially those that have historically been taken from. So yeah, just to reframe that, how do we not be better takers but better givers, I guess, and better citizens.
Yeah, we definitely go along those lines, and talking engagement and community and involvement, giving all those kind of things. And kids are awesome, right? To admit that I really find these kind of conversation with the kids today, anyways, are very excellent conversations. It's kind of nice. I drug you on for another 15 minutes, right?
No, Bill, and MA, I really appreciate the conversation. I mean, it's at the root of what we're trying to accomplish, which is changing people's, decisions. And, there's a lot of different ways to go about it, but I think this is worth talking about. I do want to, though, I know members of the team have things they need to work on. As I said, I'm willing to hang out here in case people show up, but I don't see the need for the rest of the team to necessarily stay on the call, other than the folks who are running the meeting. So unless there are further questions, I think we're good for now.
Thanks, y'all. I really appreciate it. Appreciate your involvement, and we'll see you at the next one.
Kevin, I had one other thing I wanted to touch base with you about. In the presentation yesterday, you talked about that we're making progress on the amount of mixed use housing in walkable mixed use areas, and referred to the 2018 report. I think that the department did, and it was published as part of the STS monitoring report. And I would just remind you, I commented on this 2 years ago when the commission was starting this rulemaking process. And if you look at it at a statewide level, yes, 20% of metropolitan housing is occurring in walkable mixed-use areas. But that's because the Portland metropolitan area is 60% of the state's metropolitan population. And because Metro, with the 2040 growth plan, I think they're getting 26% of their housing, and they're planning to get up to 37% of their housing in mixed use areas. But that's not true of the rest of the state. And it's really very frustrating to me, and is, I think, misleading to your commission to suggest that, we're making progress, because the reality is in the other metropolitan areas, the plans that are adopted call for 15% or so of the future housing, of all housing, to be in walkable mixed-use areas. And when you do the math, and I've done the math and I've shared it with you guys, that translates into, to meet the 30%, we need to get most new housing in CFA kind of areas. So I want to correct you on that. And if I need to do more to share what I've already sent in, to document, where we are in the numbers and what it's going to take, I'd be glad to do that, because it's really important that we not underestimate what it is it's going to take. Just to step back for a minute, as somebody who's been spending 30 years on doing this, this rulemaking isn't going to get us there. It's going to be an incremental step in getting us there, and we need to understand the size and scale of the issue that we're dealing with if we're going to be effective. And decision makers need to know and understand what that is. So thanks. Like Evan, I can go on and on.
All right, that's a fair point, Bob, and I appreciate that. I mean, you know more about that study than I do, frankly, in terms of the data. And I agree. I think the downstate metropolitan areas do have a lot more work to do. And some, I'll be honest, some have been trying to get nodal development to happen for quite some time. I think the parking changes are going to have a significant effect there, but it's incremental. It's absolutely incremental.
I don't think we want to. I don't think. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Go.
I just want to say I don't think any of us are under the impression that these rules by themselves are going to be enough. We all know that there's going to have to a lot more actions that the state and local governments take in order to make those development changes happen and occur. And I've been pushing behind the scenes. I think Kevin can tell you every chance I have is to say, hey guys, after we're done here, we need to get together with every agency we can think of that has a piece of this and push the envelope on actually making development pencil in these places so that developers will be comfortable building it. And does that mean subsidies? Does that mean building codes? Does that mean financing? Does that mean what? I mean, we have to talk with the development community about it. But I think like Cody was saying earlier, we know there's a demand for this type of development out there. It's just the fact that there's not enough of it to go around, and everyone buys a single family house because that's all there is. The status quo is a system that we've chosen or has been chosen for us, and we need to make changes. I totally agree with you, Bob. We're trying to do our part. We're probably not going as far as we would like because of various constraints that you can imagine behind the scenes, but we're doing what we can.
Well, and I want to say you're doing the right thing with CFAs, and we really need to move quickly and rapidly on that, because there's an incredible amount of inertia in existing plans and the way we do things now. I mean, it's wired for lots more, to make it easy to do single family and low density and auto-oriented development on land at the fringe. we need to shift to making investments that support infill, redevelopment, and higher densities in CFAs. So again, that's why I think CFAs are essential, and I'm glad you're pushing for them, but we need to be clear again about how high we need to get to accomplish our climate goals.
Am I allowed to share a screen here? I'm going to try. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, I can see.
So this is what the kids and I kind of fun talk about when we're talking. This is an example of a proposed project in Cairo, where we're looking at, high density housing. This is probably a 2x2 block, 4x4 block area. But the creativity and the designs, what that does in this design flow, if you look at this, that's what it would have been and what they're trying to make it. And you got power generators all around it. You've got green up the sides of the buildings, greens down the side. But mostly what it's talking about here is that the tops of this cover is designed for airflow, so that every unit is getting the predominant breeze coming through, is not only helping with power, but it's also helping with health by getting every unit to have access to a breeze and fresh air coming through the flow. There you can see the dynamics of how the design is, and plus with the green growing, cleaning the air as it's going through. But I'm not saying this project, I'm just saying, we're looking at that. And what you can see on the bottom too is that the units are townhouses all the way up the sides, but on the bottom, there's 2 floors of all the basic needs that somebody would need. Not every need, but the basic needs are available in the first floor, so that they can stay there with some ground efficiencies here in heating and cooling of the primary spaces. But we're kind of looking who's got the Epcot ideas, and they are around the world. There's lots of Epcot ideas, on how to improve the health, all 5 social determinants of health and availability of design, as long as these kind of things are allowed to be done. And just saying, that's kind of what the kids and I talk about, right? And there's just a lot of great ideas. And you look in Singapore, and there's some really cool ideas on how they do things over there as well. And just to bring down, just adding to the efficiency. It doesn't have to do with the LEED or anything like that, but just great architectural engineering.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I saw the water bodies at the base, and I'm sorry, just whatever. Maybe I'm just killing time here, but the family went to Rome a few years ago, and it was, moving on towards summer. It was pretty hot when we were there, and I just remember at night going to Trevi Fountain. It's a very popular, famous fountain in the middle of the city, and Rome has got dark, tile roads all over the place, and it was just incredible, just the cooling effect. I mean, this is 2,000-year-old technology, but it's like, some of those basic things, it's kind of neat to see, hey, people are realizing this actually works. So anyway, just an observation. Yeah, I appreciate your sharing that with this, Bill. I think those kind of things are pretty cool. Yeah, well, the thing is, I think our built environment is going to change gradually over time, it's not like we can rebuild everything overnight. So, I'm hopeful that we build more efficiently and more more ecologically friendly manner, in the future, for sure. I will say, I mean, just on a personal level, I worked as a planner for the city of Corvallis for some time, and they've got this remnant solar code that was written in the 70s, which is designed to maximize building orientation for solar uses, passive solar, really. It was not an active solar standard, but effectively, my experience with it was that it really created less efficient land uses because of the required separation between buildings. And so there are these sort of trade-offs, and I think it was a well-intentioned goal back in the 70s. But as I see it played out on, reinforcing separation between single-family dwellings, hasn't really been great environmentally, honestly, over the last 20 or 30 years.
About let's see, well, it's 2022 already. Wow, it's been 10 years. I spent 3 weeks. We were in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and things. And, you know, the valuation and the numbers of those days, and a little bit has changed, but it hasn't changed a whole lot. Solar just isn't the answer, right? Solar doesn't cut it. And solar is good for your house or an individual backup battery in your garage, things like that. You can't come off the grid. So solar doesn't pencil out even close to being a solution. And the whole concept was kind of the myth there of solar. But yeah, the ground geothermal energy is there, wave motion, wind, those kind of things have power, right? The turning of the earth is quite amount of power, right? The sun is powerful, but it gets restricted by the atmosphere. And one of the problems we had in Saudi Arabia in just getting that is that they needed to be cleaned twice a day. The sand and the dust that would go there would drop the efficiency almost 3%, from 17% down to 14% if they didn't have auto washers on them. And that was very annoying and very labor intensive. And the amount of arrays you needed, just kind of along those lines, just a basic facts of when things work and don't work.
Oh, that's really interesting. So is that your field? Are you like, you do sort of environmental engineering, or?
You know, that's what my MBA, would, believe it or not, was on city. So it focused mainly on water and sewer technology, right? Cool. So that was my thing, but we were working on that. And part of that was the power of desalination for water and things of that nature, which they use over there. But basically you need a small nuclear power plant to do desalination. And we have a company in Portland now that makes small nuclear power plants that are designed for small cities.
The new scale?
Safe. Very interesting technology, very nice, and can last almost 50 plus years. There's a lot of great solutions out there, but not a lot of will to do it.
Yeah, there's been some interesting stuff. I read the New Yorker, and they've been talking about actually fusion research and the prospects for fusion research. And you know, if I were king, I would love to see a carbon tax with dedicated revenues going towards that kind of research, because that would really move the needle pretty significantly. But politically,
and I wish it wasn't such a bad word. It's a shame that that's such a bad word, and just take the word tax off and it's still a bad word, but if we made carbon neutral buildings, and I could show you things where we actually build factories in Taiwan. My day job is semiconductor technology. So, but we have factories in Taiwan where the whole sides of the buildings are growing grass. We actually have landscapers that keep the sides of the buildings clean. But yeah, the amount of carbon you can pull out just by growing grass is amazing. That's really quite carbon neutral, as a goal, just as a social goal, should be there. But unfortunately, we've taken that to carbon tax, and political takes good words and turns them into bad words.
Yeah. Right.
I would suggest nobody else is coming. So if we all want to become tired of hearing me. Right.
Yeah, maybe we should. It seems
they'd be here by
reasonable.
now if they were coming.
Yeah, I hate to waste all the staff time. We've got plenty to do. Bill, if you're in agreement with that, let's just call it. All right. Good deal. Thanks for coming, Bill and Bob, and sticking through to the bitter end. We'll see you next time.
Yep. Thanks. Say, I just got a message from Mary Kyle, who has been on the road and out of contact. I don't know if she's dialed back in and might have a question or comment, but you might ask her before you finally sign off.
Yeah, I just saw a phone call come in. There was a caller, and then they logged out.
That one had been in before too, yeah, but it was always just showing the phone number. So I don't know who that was.
Might have been her.
She can always just call you directly. She knows
She can.
So I just got a message from her saying that she is going to get back on. So I don't know if she had anything.
Oh, okay.
But I was saying that you guys, based on what you'd said before, that we were just going to be on the line until 11:30. So you may just hang out for just another minute and see if she has something or not.
Okay. I can do that.
It is amazing if you see some of the new technology in wastewater treatment, and it's tremendously reduced footprints on that. Also takes a major investment to change into the new microscale mechanical plants. But, you know, again, part of city infrastructure. One of my complaints about what we're talking about here, even with these rules here that all feed in, is that the only way to afford it that we have a model for is SDCs, which then prices low income people right out of the housing market because of the tremendous amount of SDCs. You can have $40,000-$50,000 of SDCs on a $400,000 home. It prices people straight out of the market. And if we don't invest in newer technologies for water, sewer, and things, as well as what we're talking about here, which is streets and transportation, we'll never get housing prices to the point where they're equitable. Right? That's just a problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
SDCs is a great model for middle class and upper class. It doesn't pan out, you know, for all classes.
Yeah, and I believe that Oregon Housing and Community Services is doing an SDC study. I think that was, I can't remember if that came out of a bill, but I'll be interested to see, you know, in terms of its impact on housing costs. I'll be interested to see what their conclusions are from that study. I know it's something something we hear about a lot. All right, I see there's a caller on the line, 407-3334.
It's me. It's Mary Kyle.
Hi.
Yep, hi. I was on for the first hour and then I've been in a car, so I didn't have access. So now I'm back, but Bob said you all were still on.
Yeah. So we were just about to go. We've been hanging out for a while and really haven't had any new people, but Mary Kyle wanted to, you know, give you some space if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make before we go.
Well, Bob, did you already bring up the issue of timing of TSP update with the CFAs rules?
Yes, I did. And maybe it's, Bill's still on there. Maybe he can summarize what the answer is again.
A suggestion I had was just timing an update with the RTP updates that these regions are doing anyway.
Bob has represented you well.
It's usually the other way around.
No, but
so anyway, I was just right.
Oh,
it was just, you know, obviously we like to see a deadline and timeline for the transportation system plans to be brought into conformance with the CFAs rules. And listening earlier on to the conversation with Alyssa from Eugene and others about the need to try to align as many deadlines as possible and timelines, and we've actually put that in our testimony. This seems like a very two birds with one stone suggestion. Maybe there's others.
Yeah, and what I think I told Bob is, you know, based on the commission's discussion yesterday, I think we're going to have to set some timelines out for local governments to do TSP updates. Don't know exactly how we're going to do that yet. But the using, I think, the RTP cycle as a criterion for deciding how we structure or order those makes sense. May not be the only way we figured it out, but it makes sense. It's definitely a one way of figuring out what way to structure and schedule those for sure.
Great. I don't know if there was, so I was on the call earlier on for the conversations with, about clarifying just how to analyze housing and the CFAs, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm hoping that it sounded like that made a lot of progress with local governments in understanding better how to do that, the CFAs. So I don't know that, we've put our thoughts into letters. I don't know, Bob, was there anything else from yesterday that I'm not thinking of because I just got out of a car?
I think I covered it, and I can summarize what I think I heard and save the department redoing that.
Okay.
But this session is recorded, is that right? So are these being available?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't mean to have you all repeat stuff because I wasn't able to be on the phone, and I'm just looking at my notes from yesterday's meeting to see if there was anything else that that came up that would be. And I guess Bob, did you bring up the use of VMT issue that I know you've wanted to?
Well,
it wasn't one of the four that it wasn't one of the four that the staff and commission went through.
Right. No, but I'll mention it again for the staff, which is the financially constrained TSP is required only, if I understand it correctly, to reduce VMT by some amount. And we've said, why aren't we setting it to achieve the targets? And I don't know that we heard a response or that the department talked about that at all yesterday.
Yeah. That was definitely a missing item in the discussion yesterday. So
yeah, I think
an important one for us.
I wish Cody had stayed on for that discussion because he's the one most plugged into the whys and why nots and what we can and can't do around those issues.
So we should follow up with him. Is that what you're suggesting?
My suggestion to you, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I think I can't think of anything else now. I was just looking at my notes from yesterday's meeting. And I was just glad to hear there was no interest in delay. I don't think, I haven't heard anything that would warrant delaying adoption of the rules. The 4 issues that you all put up for the commission are not, to me, technically challenging. They're just that would require a delay beyond the current time frame. There just has to be a decision made, and there's some nuance in those decisions that can be built in. But I think you've got the time to do that between now and
no,
then.
and the commission chose not
right.
to delay the rulemaking. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty strongly because. You know, some of them are you going to do regional planning or not, or optional? I mean, that was one of the things up there. I just picked that as the example, one example. Right. It's like, it's just a decision has to be made. It's not a technically difficult decision. And I think some of the discussions this morning, at least what I heard about, the kind of how the CFAs work, hopefully cleared up a lot of things and maybe helped you figure out, a few different phrasing or wordings or something in the rules. But again, nothing that would require delaying adoption. Okay, I think that was it. Bob can fill me in on what else went on during the hour that I missed. Thank you for hanging out, though.
Yeah, you bet, Mary Kyle.
I came back in for a discussion about fusion and thought, oh, these guys are at the end of the meeting. So I got off
Sorry. I just had to throw that out there. That's my own pet thing. So.
Right, I thought, oh, well, they're getting off this meeting.
I think it's a little outside the scope of this rulemaking effort,
right.
But,
Right. And that's when Bob said, oh, no, call back in. They're still here. So, okay. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, Elliot, you can go ahead and stop the recording. I think we're good.